Previously on Slope's Game Room.
I can't believe that this is real. Droppy scrolling, they never quite do what you want them to do. Animations are threadbare, general ugliness. The game of the year for 1994.
Welcome to Quick Shot, the video game fact show for you to watch whilst you get over the traumatizing Streets of Rage knockoff. Yep, Franco wasn't all that great to look at, but with all that said, it's always nice to see a developer's output evolve over time. World Software's progress as a local Polish developer can be seen in this light, as they followed up with their local hit Franco the Crazy Revenge with another beat-em-up. This time they traded the streets of Szczecin for a dark fantasy setting. The jackets and jeans are gone in favour of metal armour, but don't worry, the out-of-control physics remain. It would be easy to say that Doman is to Golden Axe as Franco was to Streets of Rage, but that wouldn't be entirely fair to either of World Software's games. As a small developer in Poland, they were serving a market that had limited access to games enjoyed by the rest of the world. They were also Amiga loyalists, continuing to develop for the vulnerable computer despite its age. This was important as, much like when Franco was released around about a year earlier, Poland still had a large base of users for the rapidly aging hardware due to its cheaper cost and accessibility compared with the other modern consoles of the era. This meant that there was still limitations to work within. Much like Franco, Doman was a low-budget game created for old hardware and for a market with limited experience with other contemporary beat-em-ups. It all looks very similar on the surface, and you would be forgiven for assuming this game was just more of the same upon first booting it up. However, play for a little while and you will realise that this game is actually significantly better than Franco. It's not so much any major differences, but rather a multitude of small changes. One of the elements that make the game much easier to play than Franco is the improvement to the controls. Whilst the control scheme is very similar to Franco's, the game in general feels a lot more responsive. This means fewer frustrating deaths and a much more enjoyable experience as a whole. Part of the reason for this is the improved performance over Franco with a more consistent frame rate, as well as sprite animation that is more fluid and easier to follow. The combat is also given additional depth through the weapons available to the player. The base mechanics are quite simple, but as you find other characters throughout the game, you are granted different weapons, like axes and morning stars. These weapons each feel different to use and help to add to the game's barbarian tone. Visually, the game definitely looks like Franco at first glance. Sprites have similar proportions and the gore is definitely still there. In fact, this game is probably even more violent than Franco thanks to the death animations. Watching an enemy's head fly clean off their shoulders is satisfying, but they can also do it to you, so watch your back. The animation in general is definitely better, particularly for the attacks. Weapon swings can be quite elaborate and have a nice sense of weight behind them. The backgrounds are also a bit more consistent than Franco's. The art style is more serious in tone, with the graffiti and random onlookers replaced by mountains, villages and some nice gradient skylines. There are also some clever special effects like the flashes of lightning that illuminate the screen from time to time, or the transition from night to day. It's obviously not a perfect game. The graphics, whilst better than Franco's, are still quite rough, especially when measured against other games of the era. The sound is also quite grating, with certain effects repeating far too often and getting to be incredibly monotonous. The introduction music is very cool, though it definitely gives off the Conan vibes that the developer was shooting for. The important thing is that this is a much better game than Franco. Whereas the game had been charming despite the massively flawed gameplay, the game is actually surprisingly satisfying thanks to the improved presentation and more varied combat options. You've got to give credit where credit is due here. World Software clearly learned a lot from Franco's development, and it shines through in this game. You have to admire the chutzpah of small bedroom developers like these.